Hey, old man, what am I eating today? I stopped mid-step, turning my head toward the voice. Sitting on a weathered park bench was a scruffy-looking man with sharp, knowing eyes. His gray hair stuck out in untamed curls beneath a battered baseball cap, and his beard was thick but neatly trimmed, at least as neat as it could be for someone who clearly didn't have access to a proper bathroom. His clothes were layered, mismatched, and worn, the kind you wear when you've learned to survive without a roof over your head. I narrowed my eyes. Was he talking to me? You heard me, he said, leaning back. Every morning, you walk past here with a coffee in one hand and some fancy sandwich in the other. Today, I figured I'd test my luck and see if you're the generous type. There was something almost theatrical about the way he spoke. He wasn't begging. He wasn't even pleading. It was more like he was presenting a social experiment. What kind of man are you, Thomas? I hesitated. Normally, I would have just kept walking. I wasn't unkind, but I wasn't in the habit of handing out free meals either. Then I noticed something. His eyes. They weren't the vacant, lost eyes of someone who had given up on life. No, these eyes were sharp, intelligent, almost amused. Like he was playing with me, waiting to see what I would do. With a sigh, I turned on my heel and walked into the small cafe on the corner. When I returned, I tossed him a sandwich and a hot coffee. Here, I said. Enjoy. He grinned, accepting them with a theatrical bow. Much appreciated, sir. Name's Hank, by the way. Thomas, I replied. He took a bite of the sandwich and chewed thoughtfully. Then, with an exaggerated sigh, he said, You have excellent taste, Thomas. I gotta say, I like the way you pick sandwiches. Perhaps I should let you do all my meal planning from now on. I couldn't help but chuckle. So this is how you get free food? By making people laugh? He winked. Works more often than you'd think. For some reason, I found myself sitting down on the bench beside him. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was because, despite his situation, he didn't seem to be bitter about the world. What's your story, Hank? I asked. He took a long sip of coffee. Stories are tricky things, Thomas. Some are too boring to tell, some are too painful to remember. Mine? Well, let's just say life had plans for me that I wasn't consulted on. I raised an eyebrow. That vague answer makes me think there's a very interesting story behind it. He smirked. Maybe. Buy me another sandwich tomorrow, and I might just tell you. I laughed. You're a real salesman, you know that? Former salesman, actually, he said, his eyes twinkling. Now I sell philosophy. It's cheaper. I shook my head, amused. That day, I left the park with an unexpected sense of warmth. Hank wasn't just another homeless man. He was something else entirely, and I had a feeling this wouldn't be the last time we spoke. The next morning, I walked through the park again. Sure enough, Hank was on his bench, flipping through that same battered newspaper. When he saw me, he grinned. Thomas, back for more pearls of wisdom? You think I'm here for your wisdom? I asked, tossing him a coffee. He took it with a nod of thanks. Of course. Why else would a retired businessman voluntarily spend his morning chatting with a homeless man? I smirked. Maybe I'm just doing my good deed for the day. He took a sip of coffee and shook his head. Nah, you're too interested for that. Admit it, you're curious about me. I sighed. Fine. Let's say I am. What did you do before you ended up here? He stretched out his legs. Oh, big dreams, big ideas, big failures. That's vague again, I noted. Good stories take time, he said with a wink. We fell into a comfortable rhythm, talking about life, work, and the strange turns both could take. The more I spoke to Hank, the more I realized how sharp he was. He wasn't just some unlucky guy who had made bad choices. There was depth to him. At one point, he pulled out an old, wrinkled envelope from his coat. He turned it over in his hands, his fingers tracing the edges like it was some kind of relic. What's that? I asked. Just an old letter, he said quickly, tucking it away. From someone important? For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his expression, hesitation, maybe even pain. Someone from a lifetime ago, he murmured. I let the subject drop, but my mind didn't. There was something about that letter, something he wasn't ready to talk about. As I walked away that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that Hank was holding on to something much bigger than he let on. And for some reason, I had a strong urge to find out what it was. For weeks, Hank and I kept up our routine. Every morning, I brought him coffee and a sandwich, and in return, he gave me sharp-witted banter, unexpected wisdom, and a perspective on life I hadn't heard before. You know what I realized, Thomas? Hank said one morning, sipping his coffee. What's that? There are two kinds of people in the world. Those who see a man down on his luck and assume he deserves it, and those who wonder how he got there. He took a slow, deliberate bite of his sandwich. You're the second kind. And that's why I like you. I smirked. You like me because I bring you free food. He chuckled. That too. But as much as I enjoyed our conversations, one thing gnawed at me. That letter. Every so often, I'd catch Hank pulling it out of his coat, turning it over in his hands like some kind of sacred artifact. He never opened it, just held it, stared at it, and tucked it away again. One morning, I finally asked. You've been carrying that thing around forever, I said, nodding toward the envelope peeking out from his pocket. What's in it? He hesitated, his fingers tightening around the edges. Nothing important. If it's not important, why do you keep it? He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Because it's a reminder. A piece of a different life. One that didn't quite turn out how I thought it would. I could tell he wasn't ready to say more, so I let it go. But something told me that letter mattered more than he was letting on. Then one day Hank disappeared. I arrived at the park as usual, expecting to see him on his bench, but it was empty. I frowned. Maybe he was late. But as the hours passed and he didn't show, worry crept in. Hank wasn't the kind of guy to just miss a free coffee. I checked around the park, the nearby alleyways, even asked a few of the regulars if they had seen him. Nothing. That uneasy feeling in my gut grew stronger. Finally, near sundown, I found him. He was slumped against a brick wall near a bus stop, looking weak and pale, his hands trembling in his lap. The smart, sharp-eyed Hank I knew looked small. Hank! I rushed over, kneeling beside him. He gave me a lopsided grin. Ah, Thomas. Didn't mean to stand you up for breakfast. I felt a pang in my chest. You're sick, I said. Just a bad day, he muttered. Bull. I placed a hand on his shoulder. You need a doctor. Doctors cost money. I didn't care. I hailed a cab, and despite his weak protests, took him home with me. You know, he grumbled as I helped him inside, this is very unhomeless of me. Shut up and drink this, I said, handing him a hot cup of tea. He sighed but took a sip. For the first time since I met him, he looked vulnerable. Not used to people giving a damn, he admitted. Get used to it, I said. As he rested under a pile of blankets on my couch, I saw the crumpled envelope slip from his coat pocket onto the floor. I picked it up. Thomas, he said weakly. Don't. But something made me look. And when I saw the name printed in faded ink at the top, my breath caught in my throat. It was my name. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Hank stared at me, his face unreadable. You, he rasped. You were the one who sent this. I swallowed hard. 40 years ago, when I was just starting my career, I had anonymously donated money to a foundation that helped struggling students. I never thought much about it. I just signed the checks and moved on with my life. But now, sitting in front of me was one of those students. And he had been carrying this letter with him for decades. You're the reason I got through school, Hank whispered. His voice was hoarse, almost disbelieving. I wrote this letter to thank you. And now, he let out a shaky laugh. Now you're the one saving me all over again. I shook my head. I had no idea. He chuckled bitterly. Life's got a hell of a sense of humor, huh? I looked down at the letter, my own words staring back at me from years ago. I'm not doing this for a thank you. Just promise me you'll pass the kindness on someday. I had forgotten I even wrote that. But somehow, the universe had made sure it came full circle. For a long time, neither of us said anything. The weight of it all was too much. Finally, Hank sighed. Well, Thomas, I guess I owe you twice now. You don't owe me anything, I said quietly. He smirked. That's exactly what you said 40 years ago. A lump formed in my throat. Hank stayed with me for a few weeks, long enough to regain his strength. I helped him find a small apartment, and a job at a community center, mentoring at-risk kids. One afternoon, as we sat on my porch drinking coffee, he handed me an envelope. I frowned. "What's this?" He smirked. "A donation to that foundation. Figured it's my turn to pass the kindness on." I stared at him, speechless. He clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Don't get all emotional on me now, old man." I laughed, shaking my head. "You're impossible." He grinned. "And you're predictable. But hey, it worked out, didn't it?" I looked at the letter in my hands, thinking about the decades that had led us to this moment. "Yeah," I said softly. "It really did."